Nathalie Lawhead outside of the internet. I make art that people call games. I started doing this in the late 90s, early 2000s, and at that time it was considered net art, but my interest in art on computers has always been more complex than that. My most recent project is Everything is Going to Be Okay. As you can imagine, this sort of work isn't exactly financially sustainable. It doesn't pay for itself. People do support it and sometimes pay with a pay what you want option, but I largely pay for making this out of my own pocket. The pattern my career has taken over the years is to do contracting work, mostly web development, to pay for making this. I live as meagerly as possible so that all my resources can go into this. This is my passion. It's something that I have to do. I view myself as an artist, and making this is my drive. The conversations of business and financial success surrounding my art have been a strong point of contention throughout the time that I have been doing this. To me, it's not about the money. To everyone else, it should be, otherwise I am a failure as a functional member of society. Good work is often measured against how much money it has made in order to be considered good. That being said, I'm not a business success, but I am going to discuss my own personal measurement for success and the success of my art. I very much believe that some of the important things in life can't be quantified by monetary value, and art is one of those. To me, art is about dissent, raising questions, pointing at the beauty of life, or making the darkness in life tolerable. It's uniquely expressing views and giving a voice to topics that need to be expressed. Sometimes these topics aren't popular. There's a comfort zone of acceptable or successful content that people are willing to consume, and I feel like art is about challenging that comfort zone and pushing for more. Art like this doesn't sell like entertainment does. Most art relies on grants or external support to exist. For example, my grandfather was a popular sculptor in Slovenia. His work was strongly anti-capitalist. Most of his best was socialist-inspired commentary about, for example, rich people putting poor people into meat grinders in order to make meals for the rich upper class, poor people carrying crosses up a hill with rich people depicted as devils in top hats mocking them, and so on. As you can imagine, his work would sometimes get him in trouble. This was true for many artists coming from his background. Art raised dissent. On the other hand, this dissent wasn't a sustainable financial model. But this is why our society needs art. Art is a conduit for social change. Whoops. Despite the obvious financial or social setbacks, artists will make art anyway. This is not sustainable for me, but making art matters to me because art is vital for the health of a society. So here's an interesting challenge worth considering. Art like this will often not be recognized in the historic time frame that it is made in and for. It will often be laughed at, but these struggles can lead to social change and inspire others to work outside of established comfort zones. Some messages are too political, too edgy, too controversial, but need to be said anyway. It's difficult to weigh money as a metric for success against art like this. The going stereotype is that many artists die in poverty. What we laugh at today ends up being the misunderstood genius of tomorrow whose work after death makes money. Were they a failure while alive? Can we recognize this work while it's socially relevant? Did sales define their art's value? You cannot place a price on things like dissent, yet artistic dissent is a critical component to the health of a society, and things like this improve life. Here, I don't think money can define value. For example, you cannot financially measure sentimental value. One item might be priceless to one individual, and to everyone else it is trash. Applying a price on some things may even diminish their value because it does not take into account things like human impact, social impact, sentimental value, or personal worth. My first project was released in 1999. It was political commentary about poverty, war, homelessness, and refugees. And yeah, that's the name, Blue Suburbia. Most of it was presented as interactive literature, a combination of an animated feature that you interact with and experience the writing in. You unravel messages as you interact. Over the years, I have received what feels like thousands of messages from people saying that it has helped them, touched them, changed their life, made them want to pursue a creative career, and often helped them through some serious dark times. I used to get about a message every day because the project had a stylized email form that fit one of the environments. I've also received a handful of messages from people that said that it saved their life. If you make work that speaks to a deeper human condition and admits a type of brokenness in our society, I feel like it's a message of solidarity for others that are undergoing the same. Many of these emails were very personal, but there is something about art that gets people to open up and examine their lives. Art like this makes people feel less alone. The topic might be dark, but the fact that it admits this darkness speaks to a type of hope. Even when admitting hopelessness, that admission gives people hope. Like I said, it speaks tremendously to solidarity. It was a lot to take in at the time, but at the same time, it showed me how important it is to make stuff like this. One conversation that I think about sometimes was a kid in Japan that emailed me thanking me for this project. They said that they were inspired to make a virtual simulation to help their friends stop self-harming. Their idea was if they could do it in a virtual environment, they wouldn't do it in real life. On the surface, this is very grim, but this was a real problem that they wanted to fix. This is exactly what art is suited for, addressing issues that you won't be able to address in any other capacity, especially in a consumer entertainment. It's about challenging social stigma and talking about things we don't talk about. It was a very personal conversation, but this is exactly the value measurement that I quantify art against. The human value is the true value here. My peers would criticize me for throwing my talents away on social criticism in my art. For example, why does something this beautiful have to be so depressing, anti-capitalist, heavy-handed, have this kind of message? At the time in these commercial circles, it was very uncool to talk about social injustice, poverty, war, and so on. This was a very commercial crowd. They were, by popular standards, very successful in their business. Why risk appearing opinionated and controversially so if you can make money? Challenging things is risky, but it is exactly this risk that makes art so valuable. So it was an interesting contrast. To my peers, I was a failure and wasted talent. To people that played this, I changed their lives. So how do you place value in this? If I quit pursuing this art, I would be a successful creative professional. If I pursued this art, then I am socially viewed as lacking ambition or wasting my talent. How our culture dictates value has always fascinated me. If we didn't measure value by money, then I feel like art would matter more. Money serves a purpose, but it isn't the end-all defining factor of success. To me, lives touched, people influenced, making the world better is what matters. As artists, we have a social responsibility to do that. I realize how cheesy that sounds, but this is why I do it. I believe artists should exercise their talents in a way that will make the world better, bring social change, or challenge people to be better. We assert humanity through our work. There's something valuable to be learned from art and artistic descent in regards to how we measure business success, financial success, or even entertainment success. The bigger picture here being how we can help society and benefit those around us through our work. Thank you.
Robin Baumgarten from Wobbly Games.
Hello, everyone. So I'm going to talk to you today about hardware games and how I make them and how I live of them. And yes, that's what it's going to be about. So it's me. I'm living in London. I used to do mobile games, but now I'm knee-deep into experimental hardware games. And most recently also doing that full-time. And I'm going to talk to you today about how that came to be and how it works for me doing this stuff. So first of all, I have been doing experimental art and experimental games, hardware games, for about like 5 years, 6 years. This is the first thing I showed. There was the first alt control GDC. It's like a dozen sliders. It's only 8 of them. But can I turn on the volume, please? So it's like automatically moving little sliders. Yeah, it was a cool little experiment, but it was just kind of very self-contained and good start to experiment with this. Another thing I built, yes, is this a moving knife on a motor. This is not a commercial game. But yeah, it's set up so it doesn't quite cut through the skin, so it's. I built this with 3 friends at a game jam, and it's quite a nice experiment into pain. Another thing I built, and I'm showing this year at the Alt Control GDC exhibition, it's called Baumgarten. So it's like a lot of little springs, and they kind of light up and are pretty. So you can see it from tomorrow at the Alt Control GDC exhibition, amongst a lot of other cool exhibitions. But yeah, so these are my experimental games. They're on my website. There's other experiments, and I mostly make them like as part of game jams, or kind of just to see what I can do with force feedback or different sensors and so on. And one of those experiments that I did at a game jam is called line wobbler, and that's what I'm going to talk about today mostly. So that is a one-dimensional dungeon crawler, and I made it about 3 years ago at a game jam together with Matthias Maschek. And it works like this. So it's basically you have this green line, and you're kind of trying to reach the top, and there's different obstacles on the way, these little red dots, and you can defeat them by wobbling this spring joystick. And there's different levels, like this is waterfalls or like more enemies, and you kind of can see how you kind of have to shake the controller. And yeah, it started as a little experiment, but the feedback for this was very positive. So I decided, okay, maybe there is something here that I can take further and show it at more places. And that's what I've been doing basically for the last 3 years. Yeah. If you want to know more about the making of this game, I gave a talk last year together with Alex Fleetwood. He works on Beasts of Balance, which is a cool hybrid stacking game. And that's the title of the talk. And yeah, so there I talk about the making of and the challenges in the industrial design as well. For example, making custom springs in a spring factory because the normal ones weren't strong enough, especially when like kids play it or drunk people. It's, and yeah, and iterating the design through a lot of playtesting like this. It's a very helpful cat at the local hackspace. But yeah, so if you have these games, there's different ways you can approach taking them further. And one, so like there's 3 ways I've kind of outlined here. So there's doing small-scale installation art. That's basically what I'm doing, and I'm going to explain how you can take a prototype to this installation art process. Another option is licensing it out, so like arcades, toy companies, so talked to Hasbro briefly and Bandai Namco, but it didn't work out with them. But it's definitely a way to go, and I know they're looking for hobbyist inventors for their new toys at all times, so it's another way. And Kickstarter mass production is another way, so that's what the Beasts of Balance guys did, fairly successfully, but it's a lot of business overhead, and all the parts involved are not that interesting to me. That's why I haven't done it, basically. But it's definitely a viable way to go. So however, if you do like keep it small and do this like art route, in quotes, I guess, there is like a thing I call the exhibition progression. And it's basically showing it at more and more general events. So I started out showing Line Wobbler and other stuff at like Alt Control GDC, which is like one of the best ways to show like weird stuff, and it doesn't really need to be finished, or I mean maybe finished, but not very well polished. Amaze in Berlin is an amazing festival. If you haven't been to Berlin, it's a good way to see the city and see Europe's best festival. Fantastic Arcade shows weird stuff, and then once you've shown it a few times, or even before, you can show it at more normal conventions like Eurogamer Expo, Gamescom, Tokyo Game Show, and they are becoming more receptive to weird art and like experimental hardware games. And you don't necessarily need to send them a build. It's like often it works with trust, I guess, or if you have shown it before, they believe that it could be a thing that runs. Yeah, or more general artsy events are possible too, so like music film festivals, South by Southwest, although I had big issues with Line Wobbler at South by Southwest because it didn't fit in the game category. It said, oh, you should just submit it to the design track, and the design said, oh no, this is a game, you should submit it to the game track. So it's like somewhere in between, which is kind of fun, but it's, yeah, so I haven't shown it there. Maker Fair's another cool way to show games. There's a lot of kids there strongly playtesting your game. So this, for example, was at the DigiPlay Spaces, which is part of the Toronto International Film Festival. It turns out film festivals have really good budgets, so they usually pay more for showing stuff. So this was one of my favorite exhibitions, actually. So it's like really well curated, and they flew me in. So if that would happen every month, I'd be sad, but it only happens once. So yeah, and then later on you can show it at museums. So once you've shown it enough, then chances are curators will have noticed your game, and they contact you or can contact them to show it at more general museums. So that leads into how can you get paid for doing this. And so contacting museums is the first step. So for me, it has mostly been passive, so I can't really give you much advice on that. So I've been emailed by curators, but they said they have seen it at Indiecade and all these events. So showing it as much as you can is definitely one way to attract their attention. The next step is negotiating price. So that's always like kind of like a weird black box of figuring things out. Luckily for me, one of the first things where I showed it, they said, oh, we have a fixed price of 500 euros we can give you for a 1-week showcase. And I said, yes, this is very good. And I sent it to them, and that's kind of been my benchmark from then on. So like sometimes I try to go up, and then usually it would work. So I'm kind of still figuring out where, where to price it. And obviously it depends on the size of the museum. Maintenance is a big issue. Obviously, if you do hardware things, things break constantly. You don't only have software bugs, but you also have hardware bugs, and then figuring out which of the two it is often very tricky. I had a lot of issues with the spring, for example, that used to break all the time because people would pull on it instead of doing what they should. But yeah. So for funding, there's several ways, and I'm going to go through them fairly quickly. So commission installations is one way to do it. This is, I think, my favorite thing I've done so far. It's a Christmas tree installation of line wobbler. So this is like a double helix, 25 meters long of LEDs, and line wobbler. You can play line wobbler on it, and it looks a bit Christmas-y because I changed the colors to be flickering. So this is like a short video of it. Yes. So it's kind of empty because we have to set it up like at 2 a.m. in the morning when the station is closed. So it's like very long nights. But I was sponsored by the London Games Festival, so I approached them about something else, but they said, oh yeah, actually we are also talking to train stations right now, and then they give a demo at the train station of like, their portfolio, and someone said, hey, this looks like a Christmas tree installation, or like, decoration, and we don't have a Christmas tree yet. So it came together fairly randomly, and outside my control, but it's a cool thing. Also, if you want to go further into installation art, like light festivals. One-off rentals, that's the thing I've done most. It's good for short events. There's usually no maintenance issues because it only takes a short time, or like they only have it for a short time, and you can reuse the kits. Another thing is selling. So I haven't really fully figured out how to do that. I'm doing it, but like maintenance is a big open question. What should be the warranty? How long should I support it? Should I make lots of spare parts all the time? And production of the kits itself is a question that I haven't figured out. I'm making them all by hand right now, and it takes about 1 to 2 days for each copy. So that drives the price up, obviously. And then the price itself is an open question because, like, museums, you should add the artist fee. If it's friends or idols you look up to, and maybe it's lower price. So Tim Schafer really wanted one, and of course I sold him one at cost, and he has one now, so I'm quite happy about that. Leasing is another option. I haven't really looked into that much because it is tricky to set up a good contract for that, but it makes the maintenance burden clear, and it's easier to plan for venues as well, and it's a more regular way to get income. And yeah, so just quickly going forward, I want to do bigger installations in the future, so like Festival of Lights could be really cool, and arcades and bars are the next step for line wobblers, so I need to make it really like spill-proof and angry drunk people-proof. So that's going to be a very interesting challenge, and obviously making new games along the way. That's all for me. Thank you.
Okay, nice. Hi, everyone. What's up, GDC? My name's TJ Hughes. I'm a game developer and technical artist from St. Louis, Missouri. Midwest represent, So I'm going to do, that's where I started my solo company, Terrifying Jellyfish, as you can see here. But yeah, I'm going to do 9 takeaways in 10 minutes, rather. So without further ado, so yeah, these are just going to be all anecdotal takeaways that I've learned from working on an experimental game. So here we go. So just a little bit about my game. So it's a food art game called Noor. and it's a game where you just like play with your food as if you're a kid again. You just like mash buttons and have fun. So there's no goals or objectives to distract you from the fun that is just like throwing noodles and other food items into just like a ball of food horror. So, it's controlled by a MIDI Fighter 3D, so that's this device. It has 16 buttons on it, and they all glow and are shiny. And so it's usually a controller used by like producers to make music and stuff like that. But you can already see why this is like a game that required an alternative approach to be brought into existence. So takeaway number one, the fact that your project is weird isn't a disadvantage at all. When you tell people about your experimental game, it's probably a breath of fresh air. Like they're probably, it's okay to receive a surprised or incredulous reaction to someone seeing your game idea. This was actually an advantage during Noor's Kickstarter, because while people are exploring the video game section, I think the last thing they expected to see was a bowl of ramen. Like, does this even belong here? And so never have a negative or deprecating attitude towards your game's unusualness. Takeaway number two, when your game is satisfaction or feedback-based, players expect that feedback immediately, and I learned this the hard way. Once I was demoing Noor at a bar last year, and someone came out to play the game's bubble tea scene. It's the scene where you just like mash buttons and like throw boba into a cup, and like it's nice and fun, right? At the time, the scene wasn't complete yet. For some reason, this infuriated that man. Which shouldn't be, because if anything, they were supposed to be like calming and relaxing. But so some of the buttons were reacting as expected, but the ones that didn't react yet seemed to have elevated him into a state of rage and rudeness. And so he actually kind of raised his voice at me. He said something along the lines of like, okay, when I press a button, like I expect something to happen. I need this feedback. Like, and before his state of rage reached like violent levels, I had to just like quickly explain to him like, yo, the game's super early in development. Not every button works yet. Like, I totally get what you're saying. And he's like, yeah, okay, I get it. But still, people are going to expect it. They're going to expect something to happen. He then apologized if he seemed abrasive. But in that moment, I knew what it felt like to be like an Overwatch developer when Mercy got nerfed. But anyway, so that was probably the most valuable piece of feedback I've ever received from a playtest session. Like, give player input equal and apparent feedback, or you just might start a bar fight. Number three, use your game's uniqueness to carve out a niche that no one knew existed. A guy who's been on the Food Network tweeted about my game. I think how it happens, I like tweeted at Guy Fieri saying like, hey, I'm making a food game, you should check it out. But of course, he didn't respond. Like, he's a busy dude. Like, he's a living meme. He's not gonna really see that. But like, it got enough retweets that someone who's been on the Food Network got tagged in it, and he actually checked it out and like thought it was super cool. Which that was awesome to me, because here's a crossover I never thought would happen. A prestigious chef tweeting about a weird indie game. Say Noor wasn't about food, and it was like a space-themed turn-based strategy game. Like, if a Food Network chef tweeted about it, like, that'd be cool, but it probably wouldn't be the most valuable piece of like endorsement that you get during your campaign. From that, I learned just like, don't limit your outreach to just folks in the games industry. Expand your reach to like people in completely different industries or adjacent industries. Like, you never know whose interest you might pique. Number four, don't be scared to have unusual inspirations. A lot of the games are derivative in format. Some games focus on the first-person shooter format. Some take from cinema, like Heavy Rain. But my game is inspired mostly by like Instagram videos and Tumblr posts of really well photographed food that I collect. So you kind of believe I was kind of stumped the first time someone asked like what inspired Noor. But like I have a canned response I go with now. But like at the time it was just like I don't know. It's kind of subconscious. I just like see a lot of cool pictures of food on the internet. And I kind of wanted to replicate that in 3D. And this kind of showed me like if there's a feeling or a mood or an aesthetic that you want to capture in interactive form, don't hesitate to chase it, like no matter what medium it was introduced to you in. Number five, don't be afraid to take feedback from how you see others play your game. So the MIDI Fighter 3D has an accelerometer in it for tilt controls. And a lot of the scenes in Noor, there's this magnet button, which will kind of pull everything up into like all one ball in one spot. But when I saw players press this button, I noticed they would also tilt the controller, like even though like that wasn't a thing that the game reacted to. And like it would be easy to tell them like, hey, that doesn't do anything. But I think a really observant developer should take this as a hint, because your player's subconscious is basically designing the game for you. So if there's a functionality the player expects, I'll gratify them on that, or else I risk almost starting a bar fight again. So the open-endedness of the game really allowed me to do that. When designing for a weird controller, you can try making your design flexible. Since not everyone's going to have a $200 MIDI controller sitting around, I made Noor compatible with keyboard and mouse. And this was an easy fix. But I still wanted players to experiment with how the game was controlled. So I made the game compatible with any MIDI controller that you plug in. So if you wanted to play Noor on like a Launchpad or an MPK Mini, you can do that. And this kind of became a meta game in itself, because everyone was kind of scrambling to see what kind of increasingly ridiculous controllers they could play the game with. It's sort of just like the recent meme where people try to run Doom on the most ridiculous devices they can. Someone asked me like, yo, does this mean I can play Noor on my like MIDI guitar? And I'm like, sure, maybe. But it adds a lot of potential to the game's virality, because then there's a joy of discovery in finding out the different ways you can play. And so that's kind of how I use the game's weird control scheme to its advantage. 7, scope out interest in your game early, collect as much feedback as you can. When I first showed off screenshots of Noor, it was before it was even a game, really. It was just an art test to see how delicious I could make a 3D model look. But anytime I showed people like what I've done, it started with like the boba tea scene. The response was always like, oh man, this is making me so hungry. This makes me crave bubble tea. And so I became fascinated with the idea of like making people feel hungered through visual stimuli. And this was just a fun side project for me to experiment with, but around last year, my tweet of this like 3D ramen GIF blew up, and then Polygon decided to cover game, and that's when I realized like, okay, maybe I should like make this into a full project. But so after seeing how amused the internet was about 3D food GIFs, I judged there was enough interest in the game to justify a Kickstarter. But this was really ideal because it showed that my projection for success wasn't based off of chance. It was something that I already knew about the game's hype and like how much engagement my game was getting. And so if every project can be that sure of its own appeal, I think that would save a lot of project managers a lot of stress. Number 8, don't be afraid to put your personality into all layers of your creation. So Noor is a very me project, as you probably see like how I'm dressed right now. And like, yeah, I try to put as much of myself into the game as I can. And this is not only applies to the game itself, but just like in all ways of how I present it. So I really think that this can help also in the like marketing and crowdfunding campaign, because I've always found that things that have a human voice behind them get more engagement than just like a company or corporate sounding voice. And so like this person-oriented branding logic can apply to like many aspects of your project. So for example, during Noor's Kickstarter, one of my reward tiers was called Sweet Doggo, where you could submit a picture of your dog, I record a video of me analyzing and rating that dog on a scale of 1 to 10. Usually they got an 11, but like this was just like a fun thing I would do on live streams every now and then. But like when I first showed this like to peers for a review, they were like, "Are you sure you want to include this?" But I was just like, okay, this is just me knowing my like audience, and so I was like, sure. But since it was a joke, I made it like a limited tier, only one person get it. But this turned out to be a mistake because like it was highly requested, so I upped the amount and it like sold out just like immediately. So this told me that there's value in being playful, not only in your game's design, but in every way that you present your game as well. And lastly, number 9, don't be afraid to make a game that isn't a game. When I was making Noor, at some point, I played around with the idea of goals and objectives, but I was more concerned with making Noor a fun and memorable experience for all, rather than just making it fit the standard expectation of what a game is. The goal of Noor isn't objective, it's actually kind of subjective. Objectives and traditional storytelling usually involve conflict, and in games especially, that conflict is solved through battle. However, I wanted to take the experience of tasting food and abstract that into a virtual experience. But eating isn't necessarily a conflict-driven activity. Like, sure, you might have the like eat or you'll lose health conflict, but exploring a concept like taste and translating it to visual stimuli is something that you can't possibly express through like a score or a combat system. And I think that this is where we as developers have to get clever. So thanks. I couldn't make a like sign-off screen, so I just uploaded the back of my business card. Thanks a lot.
Cool. All right. Oh yeah, just a quick reminder. This will be brought up again at the end of the talk. I mean, at the end of the panel. But please rate this session. It'll help all of us, and we're good people. We deserve it in our hearts. Okay, so this is my talk. I didn't realize that we were supposed to give them specific names, so I'm going to be calling mine Ultra Crime Hell. My name is Heather Robertson. Hi, I'm Heather. My pronouns are she, her. One time I was at this big shot industry party, and this guy that I know walked by with a couple of CEO types, following behind him, and he just kind of said, hey, that's Heather, she ate paper once. That was about a year ago, and I still haven't recovered. I feel like that explains a lot about me as a person. So I make games. I make too many games. These are some of the games that I have made since the start of 2017. Each of these is one that I am proud of, except for that one in the top left. That's a B-movie game, but every time you beat it, it gets faster. That was a pure 2 hours of shame. So a quick caveat before we get going, capitalism is super messed up, and I'm super lucky to be in the position that I'm in where I'm able to make all these games, and even in my position, this is super risky. I have a lot of fears about how I'm going to be able to pay rent in a couple months. Burnout is something that you really have to be aware of, and game developers super need a union. So proceed with caution when implementing what I'm about to tell you about, which is called the Heather method, because I'm egotistical as hell. So this is how you maintain consistent output while also putting out work you're actually proud of, which is a very difficult thing to do. So let's look at that graph at the bottom right there. On the top row, you have a developer who puts out a game every couple weeks, every month, and each of those games is very strong, very interesting, and does exactly one thing very well. And then on the bottom, you have the developer who spends multiple months, or even a year, or even multiple years on a single game. And each of those games is long and soulful and has their entire heart packed into it and expresses a lot of things that they've been thinking about for a long time. The Heather method is to be both of these people at once. Now, this might seem like double the work, and it only slightly is, but these two sides actually feed back into each other in a really interesting way, because the smaller games that you're working on can actually be tests for the bigger game. Say, in your longer game, you want to add, say, a grappling hook mechanic. Now, you could put that into the longer game and see how it works in that environment, but that might involve messing with a very complicated architecture. So another way that you could do it is just make a smaller game that is specifically about that grappling hook. Make it in an hour, a day, a week, no more than a month. Put it out into the world and just see how people react to it. And you can take that test and take the results of it and put it back into the original project. This also gives you a lot of showstopper pieces with the bottom games that bring attention back into the smaller free games that you've been making, which get 300 downloads on itch because they're free. So I've done this cycle 3 times so far. I'm currently working on the 4th and 5th iterations of it. On the far left, there is 10,000 Years, which is a ruins exploration poetry game about a nuclear waste disposal site 10,000 years in the future. I made that in 2016, following that up with Secret Spaces, which is about being gay and in a hole, in 2017. And following that up with Gendirect with the incredibly talented Ryaners ACI in 2018, which is a post-apocalyptic gender punk visual novel about making out with monsters. It's rad. You get to beat up a tree. So I'm currently working on the 4th and 5th iterations of the cycle right now with Extreme Meat Punks Forever, which I'll talk about more later, and Eternity. If you want to hear more about Eternity, which is a stealth horror game about a monster who can change the past, come to my talk at 120 in North Hall. Got that little promo for you. So here's how this has been working so far. Pretty well. It's all right. It's good. It's hard, but difficulty is rewarding. I feel like we're all in this room because we really like doing difficult things for some goddamn reason. Patreon is 100% of how I make this work. Patreon is a godsend for this specific creative cycle because it allows you to, because the small games give that consistent output that Patreon really craves, and that constant, and the larger games get people interested in your work in the first place. That's how you get your customers who keep coming back with those showstopper pieces. Now, of course, this is how it's been going so far. So let's talk about the future for a minute, because this is a cool thing. I made 30 games last year. I think that's really cool, but I want to outdo myself this year. And so that's kind of what I want to talk about next. I am making a new game this summer called Extreme Meat Punks Forever, which is a serialized, story-based, hyperkinetic anti-fascist mech brawler about punk rock, cryptids, and giant robots made of meat. It is an episodic game, which means that I am going to be putting out a new episode every so often. Most of the time when people think of episodic games, they think of games that come out once every few months, like Life is Strange or Kentucky Route Zero. Please, God, give me Act 5. This is going to be going at a somewhat faster pace. This is going to be a game that comes out every 2 weeks. The first season of it is going to be 6 episodes, and I'm going to be trying my hardest to make my body physically do that. And as you can see there's visual novel sections and action sections and a bunch of weird murder poems, because that's just kind of how I roll. So this is the plan for the next, I don't know, several months of my life, where I am going to try and blend these two sides of development into the same thing. Hopefully this will mean half the work instead of twice the work, but knowing me, it'll probably be twice the work. So it's taking the shortness of the short games and the easy repeat time of the short games and fusing all those short games together into a longer experience, which will hopefully make something that is rewarding, especially over a long period of time. So there are some questions that this is an experiment, and I do have some questions that I plan on answering. And hopefully next year I'll be able to give you a talk about how this turned out. I hope. First off, is this feasible? Is this something that I can do in the amount of time that I have been given to do it because I need to pay rent this summer? Is this reasonable? Is this a thing where I can put it out into the world and get more back than I put in? And finally, will this work? Can my body physically do this? It's a lot of work. I really hope the answer is yes. So these are the 3 questions that I am attempting to answer. I'm doing a lot of interesting stuff with social media engagement. For example, if you tweet with the hashtag #MeatPunks, you have a chance for your name to end up as a character in the game. And because of the fast iteration time and the serialized nature of the game, that means that you can tweet about one update and immediately be in the next one, which I feel is a really powerful thing. I really hope that I can build a strong community around this. I'm sort of basing some of this off of the podcast The Adventure Zone, if any of you have heard of that. All right, we got 2 snaps and a woo. All right, cool. So yeah, those are the questions that I am going to attempt to answer this summer. And right now, all that I can truly say is, let's find out together. All right, thank you. I'm Heather Robertson.
Okay, hello. My name is Kaho Abe. I'm a game designer and media artist based in New York City. I design and build games that are physical and are often multiplayer games. I make circuits and build custom controllers for my games with the hope to engage people with each other in ways they wouldn't normally otherwise. And this is the reason why I make games, this spark, this fleeting moment, whatever you want to call it, between people. This is really the reason why. Oh. this is the reason why I make the games that I make. Today, I'm going to talk about not so much my games, but the path that I've taken to get to becoming an independent game designer. So I grew up in a Japanese household in the US, and we played a lot of games together as a family since we were in a foreign environment. And my mom actually designed a lot of games for her dinner parties and things. And so my parents always understood the potential of games in these social environments. I also grew up, learning how to code and hacking electronics and things. I just loved making things with the computer and trying to figure out how things worked. And after college, I became a fashion designer. That was a childhood dream of mine. And I did that for a while until it became a little bit repetitive. And then so I went to graduate school to learn how to embed electronics into clothing. And I learned how to use sensors and solder circuits. And while I was there, I took my first game design class. And this was at Parsons Design and Technology. There are people here from there. And I took my first game design class with Nick Fortuno, and Katie Salen was the director there. So games sort of was something I stumbled upon. And it was great because this was the first time I felt like I found something that satiated everything in my brain. All the things that my brain had been craving. Games have to do with like systems thinking, logic, creativity, design, technology, storytelling, all these things that I love. And also the social impact of games really connected me to my childhood and playing together, games together as a family. This is the wearable tech stuff that I did in school. And then after I graduated in 2005, kept working in fashion design, and I didn't know what I wanted to do with the things that I had studied. Like an interaction designer was still kind of this vague job title in companies, and I tried a little bit to teach a little bit, and I didn't know if maybe joining another corporation would be similar to my fashion career. And then I wanted to look into becoming an artist, but I didn't know what that meant. And so it took a while to sort of interview and find out more about things out there, trying to connect really what I wanted to do with what was out in the world. The biggest change came in 2010 when I became a fellow at IBEAM, Art and Technology Center. This is a nonprofit that supports media artists in New York City, that's located in New York City. And it would support me for the next year and a half with my art practice, making social, physical, digital games, and tech and wearables. And IBEAM is an organization that also supports open source technology and culture. So it encouraged me to share my practice with the public. And so I had a chance to really do that through workshops, through talks, through other community involvement. And this is where I started a monthly playtesting event with Come Out and Play, which ran for about 3 years, sort of supporting the community that existed between art and games. And in 2013, with IBEAM support, I was able to start a free after-school program for high schoolers called Playable Fashion, where they learned about programming, game design, building circuits for custom wearable game controllers, which is essentially my practice. And I teach that program now with collaborator Ramsey Nasser, and we've been sharing the content with educators and librarians recently in pedagogical development workshops. And at IBEAM, this is from the playtesting, I'm sorry. This is from playtesting. This is Eric Zimmerman's game that he was playtesting. Oh, Natalie Posey and Eric Zimmerman's game. This is some content from the after-school program, just the embroidery hoop with printed, inkjet printed, sort of almost like a map to guide people through lessons to learn more about soft circuits. And then I did another workshop series, 6-part workshop series called Beyond the Joystick, and which has grown over the years into a class that I teach at the NYU Game Innovation Lab, where I'm currently an artist in residence. And so it's funny because I never really thought of myself as an educator. I like to think of myself as an artist sharing her practice and exploring ideas with students, no matter how young the students are. What is most surprising is that I found creativity in education, and because I view it as sort of that I'm designing an experience for the students, and it's been super satisfying for me. So sometime during my career, I started really, it hit me, especially at IBeam, that I need to make decisions. I have to be creative with my career as much as I am with my work. And so I would ask myself questions like, where can my work exist? Is it in academics, art, games, formal education, in DIY? And it was an important thing for me to realize, to be open to various opportunities and to be able to imagine my work existing in different ways and places. So now my work focuses on costumes as game controllers, exploring questions like when you dress up as an avatar in a game, when you dress up as the avatar in a game, can you become the avatar? If our costumes are embedded with sensors and we can move and act like an avatar, does that experience, does the experience become more dramatic or immersive? And I'd be lying if I said my career is stable. Education helps, and also applying to these art grants, contests, and residencies also help. But I've been really grateful for the support structures and for the opportunities that have allowed me to continue down this path. And when I'm lost, another thing that has helped guide me is asking myself what makes my brain happy, right? Instead of following my heart, I follow my brain. And in the past, like, parts of my brain have been happy at different times in my career, but trying to find something that satisfies all of my brain has always gotten me closer to where I want to go, always. Thank you.
All right. All right, everybody. So, my name is Tamara Duplantis. Y'all can call me Tammy. I'm a game developer and a composer from Baton Rouge, Louisiana. I make games. I make games and perform music as Tambalaya, like jambalaya, but with a T. And I'm here to tell you about my alternative path to indie dev success. Now, first things first, before we talk about the path, we need to define our destination. As we've kind of already seen in parts of the session, success is kind of it's a vague concept, and it can mean many different kinds of things to many different kinds of people, depending on what you're looking for. So as an artist, I see myself as an artist, I feel that my goal is to express myself and to assist others in expressing themselves. And as an added bonus, to pay rent if I can. So if I can fulfill each of these goals, then I'm doing exactly what I want to be doing. So how do I express myself? I compose experimental music. I write text scores. I create generative art tools. I do a whole bunch of strange experimental art stuff that experimental art people do. But I'm speaking here today because I design experimental sound art games for Game Boys. Here's a couple screenshots of it. But so my most well-known game, a Chafalaya Arcade, which these are screenshots of. It's a little bit of each of those things that I mentioned. It's a Game Boy game in which players improvise chaotic chiptune music with each other while generating abstract bayou pixelscapes, interspersed with poetic reflections on Louisiana life. I have a video for it. We will see if it works and makes wonderful sounds. If not, well, you can at least see it over here, maybe, or not. Sorry, this is not my computer. Oh, well. There's a wonderful video, I promise. So, yeah, so why develop for Game Boy? Well, for me, it started off as kind of just an attempt to learn C by myself, because I'm an art student. I was an art student. And I thought it would be a fun way to learn C programming, just make something weird with it. But it became my favorite canvas because of its computational limitations. There are only so many sounds that the Game Boy sound chip can make, so it becomes a fascinating compositional challenge for me to use them efficiently. And as I started to release my games, I began to realize that these works had an audience, partially due to the prevalence of chiptune. Is anyone here unfamiliar with chiptune? Yeah. Cool. So yeah, it's a genre of music, repurposes the aesthetics and hardware of video games to create new music. It's not so surprising in retrospect, but it turns out that the people who are well-versed in the sound palette of Game Boys are really interested in programs that stretch its boundaries to the limit. Okay, but why sound art? Well, as I mentioned, I'm an artist, and that's kind of my background. I kind of fell into games from the experimental art world. But I made art in the first place because it's therapeutic for me. I make my games to work out my anxieties, my grief, my hopelessness, feelings on mortality. And in the case of a Chafalaya Arcade, the pangs of homesickness for southern Louisiana, which is a place I love and a place that I call home, but it's also a place that's rapidly disappearing due to coastal erosion and climate change, and its politics is kind of inhospitable for a wonderful trans woman like me. So when you know that your grandmother's house with all its memories encased within will one day, pretty soon probably, sink into the Gulf of Mexico, it makes every day away from it feel so much more painful. So this is how I dealt with it by making this game. And this generally is how I deal with all of my difficult emotions. So I'm going to keep making these no matter what happens. It's a function of how I process life. So then the question for me as a working artist becomes, how can I use the art that I'm already making and the skills that I use to make it to help me achieve my other goals? Well, the obvious first step as a game developer is to release my games to the public. So I post all my games on both itch.io and GameJolt. You can play them there or download them and run them on your computer if you have emulators. So they're there for anyone to download and play. I then, as expected, I take my games to festivals or conferences. Here we have a picture. So there's my rig of 2 Game Boys, Super Nintendo. In this particular rig, they would be playing like 3 different instances of the game. Everyone is playing their own game, but cycling through different instruments. So they're playing together as an ensemble. I really wish y'all could see this video. So I bring them to festivals, conferences. I showed it at a Mardi Gras ball last month. It was wonderful. So yeah, they showcase my games at their events. So the catch with these works is that they aren't just games, but they're also musical instruments. So they're best experienced, I think, when approached with that mindset as an instrument that you play with. So in releasing these games and having other people play them, I'm getting my expression out there, but also the people who play my games are finding musical and artistic ways to express themselves through playing. So checks out my 2 goals. Another thing about my game's hybrid nature is that it opens up a variety of different methods for presentation. So what else do I do? Well, the obvious first step as a musician is that I perform my games at artistically minded music venues on that Super Nintendo. So again, I have my Super Nintendo, I hook it up to whatever projector is there, and then hook it up to the speakers, and I just play through my games as a experimental music set. Yeah, so, and then I play through them in the most expressive way that I can. In fact, I've been talking about Atchafalaya Arcade as a game, but it started life as a piece of music for a quartet of electronic performers, which, by the way, premiered across the bay at Mills College in Oakland. Then sometimes an event will ask to feature one of my works, and for whatever reason, I can't physically be there. So in that case, an electronic musician will go and perform my pieces for me. This happened last year with the Laptop Orchestra of Louisiana. They wanted to play Atchafalaya Arcade as a piece of music, so I sent them the ROMs, they got the hardware, and they had performances of Atchafalaya Arcade all around Baton Rouge. Yeah, so, lost my place. So this is kind of functionally no different from like streaming a game, you know, but the context is markedly different, I feel like, because in most streams I've seen, although the streamer is in control of the game and shaping the experience that the viewers are watching, I find they often rhetorically position themselves as kind of part of the audience, like, hey guys, look at this game that I found. I'm controlling everything, but we're all gonna be part of the audience. But when someone's up on a stage, and that's a fine way to, you know, interact with games and everything. It's super cool. I like streamers. But being on a stage in a concert hall or a music venue, it changes that context because in that setting, everyone involved is very clear that the people on the stage are just as involved in making the art as the people who thought up the art in the first place. So I'm expressing myself. It's helping the performers express themselves. Check. So before I go, I want to address that last goal that hasn't really come up much, paying rent. Do my games sell? Yeah, but not a lot. Do I make money from my Game Boy performances? Yeah, but not a lot. So to fulfill that goal as a game designer, you know, as everybody, I do freelance. I take on short-term programming jobs, mostly helping to design and implement unique generative musical systems in a game. FYI, I'm available. Just don't ask me to make a PowerPoint. So, yeah, and as a musician, I teach piano. I'm a piano teacher. And yeah, and I take on accompaniment jobs at Children's Theater. And that gives me life. It is one of my favorite just jobs, period. And, you know, I probably wasn't invited here to talk about that aspect of my life, but I think if there's anything to learn from an alternative path, it's that I found the one that works for me by identifying the things that make me feel fulfilled and saying, like, to hell with devoting my life to an industry, not just this industry, just any industry, that I can be successful in different fields, you know, searching for my goals and in different contexts, and I can use my successes in one field to help set up successes in another, and vice versa, helping each other build up. So to my mind, there's no difference between, you know, the game design, the musical instruments, the children's theater, like, there's no difference because they all, for me, reach to the same goal, expressing myself, helping others express themselves. And that shapes not just how I make my art, not just how I present my art, but ultimately how I live my life. And I highly suggest y'all find the things that you want to find and find your own path. Thank you.